So we have a problem. Let's divide that up as animal welfare people who are very concerned about the future of street dogs and dogs in public places in India. I'm Priya Chetty Rajgopal and I'm with CG Memorial Trust in Bangalore. Let's look at this from 3 points of view. One is, what exactly is the Supreme Court order which was released on 7th of November? And secondly, how is it being carried across multiple states? And we can talk about Bangalore. And the third is, what can we as animal welfare people and concerned feeders, caretakers do about it? So let's start with the Supreme Court first. Now, the suo motu writ petition, which is number 5 of 2025, it actually modifies and supplements the existing guidelines, which now place new and enforceable duties on municipal and state authorities. Right? The main actionable points, and this is something that we need to know, is one is, as far as general stray dog management is concerned, the sterilization and release continues. The non-release exception there is only for those which are infected with rabies or suspected to be infected with rabies, or those exhibiting aggressive behavior, which will not be released back to the same locality. Now, this general compliance is ongoing, and the non-release deadline is immediate, so that's expected to be done right away. Let's take the second category, which is institutional and public health, public areas. Removal and permanent shelter. This is what is immediate. The jurisdictional municipal bodies have to remove every stray dog found within the premises of educational institutions, hospitals, whether public or private, sports complexes, bus and train depots and railway stations. So these will not be released back to those institutional areas and must be shifted to a designated shelter after sterilization and vaccination. And if they're already sterilized and vaccinated, they have to be shifted to a shelter. So this again is immediate. Under that, they also have requested that the state and union territories must ensure that these institutions, whether it's schools, colleges, public transport hubs, sports facilities, hospitals, are secured, particularly through boundary walls to prevent entry of stray dogs. Now, this compliance deadline has been given as 8 weeks from now, which is the 22nd, 23rd of November. It's 8 weeks, that is 2 months from November 7th. So that's actually, that's January 7th, 2025. The standard operating procedures, they expect AWBI to formulate uniform SOPs for prevention of dog bites and the management of stray dogs in institutional premises. And that again is 8 weeks from November, so that is January 7th, 2026. The third category is road safety, where they have asked for removal from highways of stray cattle and other animals from national highways, expressways and state highways, and that these animals must be housed in dedicated gauze, sadans, pounds or shelters and cannot be released back onto public roads. The fourth is compliance and monitoring. The very clear focus is that state and union territories must look at the report and take immediate steps to address the deficiencies and shortcomings in the current compliance efforts, and that again is immediate. The filing of affidavit is to be done, which is a comprehensive additional affidavits detailing remedial measures taken to ensure full compliance, which is what we've talked about. And this is before the next hearing, which is on Jan 13th, 2026. So within the context of the ABC rules, this is a broad summary of what was the order on November 7th. The mandate of ABC, which is capture, neuter, vaccinate, release, does not really change. The conformance of that continues, and it is expected to continue in its most sincere form. The only modification is the release back for sensitive areas. So the schools, hospitals, transport hubs is the modification for the release back category of the ABC rules, which again, begs discussion and needs to be looked at. So while these are enforceable from the Supreme Court is they have the constitutional authority, and it's binding on all courts and authorities in India under Section 141 and 142. There's also contempt warning, so non-compliance of directions will be viewed very seriously and may even initiate contempt proceedings against the erring officials. Personal accountability to these chief secretaries of all states and UTs is directed to ensure strict enforcement and hold the concerned officers personally accountable. So this is what has happened. We've had from August to now a number of different things happening in the Supreme Court, and this one has been in some ways very concerning, because very large pockets of space, which are these 4 categories or 5 categories of hospitals, educational institutions, sports complexes, and transport depots. These are the categories, and national highways are going to be a concern in terms of not allowing the dogs to come back into that space and creating boundaries. So now this is a reality, and what is moving on to the second issue, which is what is really happening and what is the level of enforcement across India. Given the fact that the chief secretaries themselves have been reached out to, have been told very clearly that this is enforceable and subject to contempt, I think there's obviously a huge amount of effort that all chief secretaries are putting in to make sure that the data, the metrics, and the infrastructure is created as fast as possible in order to make the deadlines, right, which has been set out by the Supreme Court. So this, for us, is worrying. But let us now turn it on its head and look at what is actually being done. So first and foremost, it looks like most of the chief secretaries are collecting data in terms of which are all the institutions that fall under this category, and then reaching out to through their nodal officers to get the information on how many institutions, and therefore from the institutions how many dogs, and then moving on to boundaries and things like that. So once the metrics are available, they're also in parallel looking at setting up shelters within the city to house these dogs. The numbers and metrics are incredible, and I'm at a loss to understand how that can be even vaguely enforced. And there are, while the reality of the highest government official in the state having to follow the Supreme Court's instruction is something we cannot argue with. We can only request them to be benevolent, be appreciative of the logistics, reality, and compassion of the situation. But the fact that they have to enforce it until anything changes, and we hope it will, is something that is worrying, extremely worrying, but something we'll have to look at as something that's going to happen. It's going to happen, and that's something we need to look at. So I'm just quickly sharing some of the points I made in terms of how this works, and I think it's so difficult. So while any corporation or any municipality will obviously, be concerned and have commitment to effective, humane, and animal management, the immediate implementation of the Supreme Court order is going to be not only untenable, but also will actively undermine public health, animal welfare, and the, I think, reasonably good job already done by BBMP and GBA, if you look at Karnataka and Bangalore so far. So some of the key points that I had listed, and I'm sure that you will agree with many of them, and if there are any others that you have, please share, is my concern was this order requires detailed study, not precipitous action. We can't run into something right now without even evaluating what the implications are, what the contours are, and the nuances of something so far-reaching and I would say catastrophic. So while the deadline has been given of 22nd November in cases of what the progress is, we should use this as a thorough assessment of the logistical, spatial, financial implications of this massive undertaking, and not look at, which I sincerely hope, not look at the space as a time for hasty and chaotic roundups, because apart from the tremendous anger that it will generate, it will also rushing this process will involve definitely failure and chaos. I mean, it will be guaranteed. Look at Bangalore. Second point which I would like to make is Bangalore has or is already achieving herd immunity, and that's a triumph that we must protect. We must make sure that the data-driven success, which is very, very clear, you can see we are closer to 85% in some areas and maybe 70% in others, but we are getting there. So the scientific process is getting to work, and we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of population, in terms of rabies, in terms of human-animal coexistence. The herd immunity, especially given the high sort of coverage of rabies vaccinations, the herd immunity created is breaking the transmission cycle of rabies and is also protecting human and animal populations. So this public health success story is something that we should actually celebrate in India as something that is work in progress and very, very close to, I think, fruition. Removing this and moving away from this will undermine the success of the program that has already happened, and also the indiscriminate removal of vaccinated healthy dogs from the ecosystem will shatter the herd immunity, make the city more vulnerable to rabies, and create different kinds of outbreaks. So that's something we need to know. Third, let's look at the vacuum effect. We all know that the vacuum effect is something that is very likely to happen. Removing all dogs from a territory will create a vacuum effect, and dogs from adjacent, potentially non-vaccinated areas, including bordering rural or open Gomala areas, for example, will move in to occupy this vacant, resource-rich territories. And this will reset the problem to zero, and replacing known, vaccinated, regulated, friendly dogs with unknown, unvaccinated and unsettled ones, making future ABC much more difficult. So this is a retrograde step. The current system, such as it is, we can always find faults with it, we can pick holes in it, but the fact is it is work in progress, and it is a consistent effort that is producing results. The current system is effective, it's regulated, it's humane, and the dogs in these public spaces are not unmanaged. They are part of a well-oiled systems. They have responsible caretakers, which are identified very clearly, in charge of taking care of the dog and the area around, designated feeder spots and timings. So these are things which are definitely very important. We have a near complete vaccination, which you can definitely see. Most of the vast majority at least are vaccinated. So removing these integrated dogs is not a solution for sure. It's an act of actually extreme cruelty and capriciousness, which actually solves no existing problem. The fifth point is the logistic and financial impossibility. I don't even know where to start, because the scale of this task itself makes it unworkable. Whether you look at identifying and listing, it's a monumental time-consuming task. Then shelter capacity. Housing these dogs will require, if you look at even Bangalore, if you look at even 3,000 dogs, I mean, just let's take in Central Corporation, 3,000 dogs, and I'll tell you why I've come to that number. We will require minimum of 10 shelters. It's a prohibitive cost. For anybody who runs a shelter today and manages with one, they know how much they struggle. And whether or not you have government funds backing it, it's not going to happen. You have approximately 5 crores that is required for the infrastructure of each shelter, provided it's done in a good way. Your annual recurring cost for this across would be about 3 crores, because you have food, medical care, staff. The dog that has cost you about 2,000 rupees for the surgery, maybe 300 rupees a year for the 500 rupees a year for the vaccinations, and maybe a couple of hundred. The same dog is going to cost you close to 50,000 to a lakh per year to maintain. I mean, it just sort of completely dazzles the mind as to how can this be done. And the cost, as you can see, is multiply higher than the current effective ABC program. And this catastrophic misallocation of public funds for a cruel and rather ineffective outcome, again, begs for a reason, and we can't seem to find the reason. The sixth point is the legal and authorization minefield. The only agencies that are authorized to handle dogs under the ABC program are the NGO partners, which are the AWBI listed, VSAWRD or COVA or whatever else. Now, if the NGOs comply with the order, which is essentially relocation, they run the high risk of breaking the acting against the ABC rules and going against the AWBI, which will result in their licenses being suspended or revoked. Bad for them, bad for us, because ABC gets reduced then. Public and activist opposition is definitely going to be there, because there's going to be massive, very legitimate resistance from animal welfare activists and the public, and protests and legal challenges that will challenge the framework. So this is going to take a lot of time. Let's look at the seventh point, which is the contradictory legal framework and the need for clarity. The order seems to contradict the Supreme Court's own earlier judgments and the centrally enacted animal birth controls rules, which is 2023, which mandate very clearly sterilization and vaccination as the primary lawful method for stray dog population control. So until this legal contradiction is resolved and examined and clarified, any drastic action risks being a colossal waste of time. And not only time, but effort, money, and very likely to be potentially overturned on sheer logic. I'm not even getting to this, so I'm getting to this last. Look at the tremendous suffering of the voiceless. See, the dogs don't read the newspaper. The dogs don't know that at Supreme Court there has been an issue, and they are the subject of such drastic and such incredible turnaround where their safety, their peaceful existence is being affected. They don't know that. And the sentient beings at the heart of this very issue are going to be tremendously affected. I mean, whether you look at the extreme fear, the cruelty, the suffering for the dogs who are peaceful, integrated into their environments and just being taken off into a shelter. And we all know what that means. The death, injury, hunger during capture, and also the crowding in these shelters. There are voiceless, victims of a decision made far away in Delhi, where an uncertain fate waits for them. And that's really unfair. The matrix of data clearly shows now that the compassionate and scientifically managed ABC ARV program is working. It's a public health model for other cities. We can always do better, but so far there has been a certain amount of pace, structure, movement towards, as I said, the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, look at the transportation analogy if you want to. I mean, we should be building public transport, metro, suburban rail, encouraging pedestrian. We can't keep having shortcuts. Like we suddenly want to build a helipad and transport everybody by helicopter or a tunnel or whatever else it is, which is short-term and essentially a band-aid solution, which is what this is seeming to be. The reason is not far to seek. See, when there is an issue with a bite or rabies or a child, I mean, one can certainly understand the tremendous amount of suffering, emotional impact that is made on any human being, including ourselves, as to why this is happening. And I'm certainly not going to do the obvious and make comparisons saying people get hurt by other beings as well, whether it's a criminal or whatever else. So that's not an appropriate argument, and that I would not want to do. It is very hard for people like us who work very hard on animal-human coexistence, who are striving so much to make sure that the numbers as far as ABC and ARV are concerned allow for more people to coexist with animals, whether they're on the street or get adopted. We do a lot of work in promoting adoption of Indian dogs as well. This is a huge step backwards. So what we recommend, and I'm now specifically coming back to the third aspect of the chat we've had now. The first one we've talked about is what has really happened with the current Supreme Court 711 order. And then we talked about how is it filtering down to the states and what exactly the states are doing about it, and we're seeing it in real time, right? So the third thing is, what do we do as citizens about this? So one of the things is, for I think the chief secretary or the government officials also should file an affidavit, talking about how difficult this is to implement, because the reality of it is really, really hard. While they're struggling to get a few things done, on a large scale, it's going to be impossible. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of crores of expense for literally no reason. And this is hard-won taxpayer money. This is also cruel. On many grounds, it just doesn't work. And the effort that is required, they're going to be, these shelters have to follow a certain standard. There has to be a lack of cruelty. There'll be a lot of additional people required to monitor this. Many people assume that shelters are just a nice spa for animals to go there and relax rather than being on the roads, without realizing what a shelter really means. Whether you look at a very well-run, high-quality shelter which is meant for sick and suffering dogs, even that is not an ideal situation for a healthy a dog which is just living its life out. It's not. And if you look at something which is going to be government run, and we know some of the, we've seen some of the horrendous sights in Delhi of how these dogs have been pushed into vehicles and shoved into these undisclosed shelters. We know what it really means. It means not just suffering, but death. Because who's going to sit down and clarify, what 40 dogs were taken from here, how many reached, what happened? They become nameless beings. That's all that's going to happen to them. And that part of it is really worrying us. But I think it's important for us to file, a review petition before the Supreme Court, not just asking for a review, but also presenting the facts of Bangalore's reasonably successful ABC program, and therefore the infeasibility of this order. Because give us a couple of years and we're going to have a neutral growth on dogs. We're going to have a completely vaccinated population, and we're going to have herd immunity with no rabies cases whatsoever, and very few dog bites, I'm sure, those which happen in normal course of events. And we need to, secondly, seek clarification from the court on how this order reconciles with the ABC Rules 2023. We should request the government, while they are building all these, the infrastructure, or creating the elements, we should require them to at least hold all action till clear, consistent and implementable legal direction is received. While all this is happening, we as citizens and the government and the ABC, the Animal Health Welfare Department, we are affected because now we have shifted from BBMP to the GBA. We have 5 corporations now instead of 8 zones, and there's an increasing level of confusion while things settle down in the new system. It's a very big administrative change. So while that is going on, we have to continue to strengthen the existing proven ABC and ARV drives, which protects both the citizens and the animals effectively and humanely. So we must work closely with the government. The government must partner very strongly with the community to make sure that there's last mile reach and effectiveness. And from our perspective right now, I strongly believe that as an India that is focused on sentient beings who have drafted such good laws and far-reaching, impactful, well-synthesized laws that look at both humans and animals in the last so many years, I'm sure we won't take this retrograde step back of just grabbing dogs off the street or dogs off a bus stand and just pushing them into shelters. This is going to be a very terrible and tragic step indeed if it happens. And I'm very confident that it won't. But in the current scene, I think as citizens, we have to work very closely with our Animal Husbandry Department, ensure complete transparency with the corporation, make sure that any pickups, anything which is done completely transparently, shared with us so we know what is happening. We cannot allow any shelter to be set up unless the SOPs and all the structure, the framework, how is it going to be managed, what funds are going to be allotted, until there's complete clarity on that, and a committee with the human representatives as well as the government are partnering in terms of making sure that something will be used for abandoned or sick or whatever animals in the future, if at all these shelters have to be repurposed. But without that, the current system of just taking dogs and putting them into packing them into ABC centers in cages is just not workable. It's not going to happen, and that's something we will take very strongly if it indeed gets misused on that ground. So we've talked about these 3 things, which is what has really happened with Supreme Court, how is it translating across the states and cities, what is it that we need to do about this. So I think to conclude, it's a terrible time for anybody. It's a terrible time for animal lovers particularly, and it's a terrible time for poor animals who really don't know what's coming. But we have to gather strength and understand that the same Supreme Court, which we have stood by and they have supported us for so many years, have now put very, very stringent rules on the top officials of every state, including the chief secretaries. So they have to do their job, and they will do their job, which is creating metrics, getting the numbers, sharing the data, working towards building shelters for such dogs, and so on. And while that happens, while this may not be something we desire, is we need to partner to ensure that whatever is done, and hopefully it is rolled back, that whatever is done will eventually be something that at least benefits animals. And we can have an infrastructure that will help perhaps abandoned animals or sick animals in the future. So that will be maybe something that is worth it. But the sheer waste of public money on something like this is something that's worrying me, because look at the fact that feeders and caretakers are doing such a great job with no thanks, with no support whatsoever, and just let them do what they're doing and just allow us to make the communities that we live in, the communities that all of us want to live in, make it safer, make it more compassionate, and make it more inclusive. And a furry face and a wagging tail is the simplest thing that can remain on our streets and be cared for. Let's do that. But let's also support our government in this very current difficult time that they're going through. Let's be compassionate, let's be logical, let's be sensible, let's be pragmatic, and let's protect the animals.